All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to have Nickle Van Warmer here to talk about navigating change. I feel like all of us are experiencing change every day. Change is inevitable. Nick is an experienced learning and organizational developer with a demonstrated history of working in the professional training and coaching industry. He has a Master of Science in Human Resources Development from Rochester Institute of Technology, and I'm excited to have him here today. And thank you so much, Nick, for being here, and I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Grace. It's good to see everyone. I'll just give it a few seconds. I see some people's audio still connecting, so I'll wait for them to that little three dots to stop moving. And I'll wait for everyone else to find their camera button to turn the camera on. That was a subtle hint, right? Was that subtle enough? I think that was subtle enough. Anyway, just because we're going to be talking to each other, by the way. This, yeah, I'll be doing a lot of talking, but I'm also going to be hearing a lot from you. So it's just easier to hear from you if I can see who's talking. All right. Give it a few seconds there. Also, this is probably maybe a good time to grab a pen or a piece of paper if you want to take notes as well. We can provide the slides for you. I can send them to Grace and she can send them out afterwards if you wanted, but not exactly PowerPoint or death by PowerPoint heavy here. So definitely want to grab some notes. All right. As Grace said, I've been working within the change management area for a while. Came to California from New York and was doing that's just the same sort of work over in New York as well. And then I moved here and was working at USC as their senior organizational development consultant there. And then I saw the light and I came over to UCLA. So been with UCLA now for 4 years. And yeah, so today we're going to talk about change. Has anyone ever never experienced change? Has anyone gone through their life without experiencing change? Anyone here? You can raise your hand. It's okay. For those of you, oh yeah, yeah, laugh. Stephanie's like, yeah, right. All right, good. Good. That means everyone here is, we're going to talk about something relevant to your life, right? Something relevant to your life. So within the next hour, you're going to learn everything I know about change. No, not really. Within the next hour, we're going to hit some highlights and things about change. You could spend your whole life studying change. People do. There are people that just spend their whole life studying change and how to actually lead organizations through change. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to just highlight some key points. I want to give you some very practical things you can think about and actually apply today. But not just to yourself, but also if maybe you have a team that you have to lead through change. So we're going to be looking at through two lenses today. One is the lens of you, and the next is the lens through, okay, what about your team? All right. So everybody can see my screen where it says excelling in a changing environment. All right, perfect. That's what we want to see. First and foremost, we have to get this off the table. The only thing constant is change. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this quote. It's been around for many, many, many years. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes change can actually be exciting. Right? Think of a time where something's happened in your life and it was exciting. Something new came out. The change is very exciting. For example, maybe you get promoted. That's a change, and it's exciting. Sometimes it's something that we actually dread. Right? You get news of something like, oh my gosh, really? We got to, whatever it is. Change could be, family member lost their job. That's a big change, something you dread. Sometimes it could be both. Something exciting, at the same time, something you dread, right? It can bring anxiety and excitement at the same time, right? Often change can bring both. For example, if anybody's ever, been told, oh, we're having a baby, guess what? You probably experienced those two things simultaneously, like, oh my goodness, plus a little bit of excitement, right? So it could be both. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to stop sharing real quick. And for those of you who are not on camera, use a little emoji symbol for me, please, so I can see you are there and reacting. For those of you who are on camera, it's much easier. Just go ahead and raise your hand physically. I can see. So do me a favor here. Raise your hand if you still live in the same house you grew up in. All right, couple. All right. Great. Next question. Raise your hand if you're still working in your very first job. The job you have now is your very first job. Ooh, one hand. All right. So it looks like from that, the majority of actually probably looks like everyone has gone through some sort of major change. So these two changes I just mentioned are some very major life changes, by the way. Moving is a life change, and getting a new job. Those are life changes. All right, so major life changes. So everyone here has gone through major life changes of some kind. So the question is, if we've all gone through changes, and change is always happening, if we're always experiencing change, why is it so hard? Why are we so practiced, right? Practice makes perfect. And man, if that's the case, I should be perfect at change because I've had a lot of practice. I don't know about you. Why is it still so hard if we're always experiencing change? And why can't we just learn how to adapt to it really quickly? We're going to give some reasons. First and foremost, change equals emotions. All right. I want you to think about the example of moving houses, going from one apartment to the next, moving across town. It doesn't have to be a big move, just any move. Think about that time. Was that change simply a matter of just moving boxes and furniture from one location to the other? Was that straightforward? Or were there any emotions involved when you moved? Maybe you were sad to leave where you lived. Maybe you liked where you lived. Maybe you were anxious because you didn't know if you're going to get to what the neighbors are going to be like. You didn't know if you're going to have to meet new people, especially if you're moving across country. I moved a lot. So first, I grew up in Washington State, and I moved from Washington to New York. No, listen, I moved from Washington to Mississippi, from Mississippi to Idaho, from Idaho to New York, from New York to California. Each time there's emotion involved. Well, who am I going to meet? Am I going to make any new friends? What kind of community am I going to be in, etc.? So there's emotion involved with any change. Starting a new job, getting a promotion, going to a new company. It's not simply a matter of packing up my stuff on my desk from one, moving it to the next, and starting. No, there's emotion involved. There's the unknown. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So change equals emotions, and a range of emotions, which is one of the reasons why we still find difficulty with change, because really, change, looked at that way, managing change is a skill of regulating emotions. And we don't often think of it that way. When we look at change management, we don't think of how we regulate emotions, but change equals emotions. Something else we need to think about is when we go into change, we're really going into the unknown. Think about any major change you've experienced. It could be work. Maybe it's simply a software, some new software. You have to use some new software. Maybe you have a new boss coming in. Maybe you are working. Maybe that's it. Maybe there's a change in leadership. What makes you anxious is the unknown. How is this person going to be? I may not have liked my old boss, but I sure know how to work with them. Now I don't know how to work with this new person, right? It's this unknown. So that's what this change is bringing us. And from the very beginning of human existence, we want consistency, right? Because the unknown could be something dangerous. So we really seek consistency. So that's one of the other reasons we want to look at why is change so hard. Well, because consistency equals survival, right? I want to stay in the known because I know what it is. I know how to navigate this. But if I step into the unknown in any direction, oh my gosh, I don't know. Now I have to go figure out how to deal with that. And we do this with everything. We do this with everything. So what we actually do is we try to predict the unknown in many parts of our lives. Think about the weather. Okay, just the weather alone. How many of you look at the forecast for the next day? Anybody here look at the forecast for the next day? Robert does. Yeah, other people. Yeah, of course you do. What's going to be? Why? Why do we look at the forecast for the next day? Because we want to know what's going to be happening in the future, right? We're predicting it because we don't want to be faced with the unknown. We don't want to be hit with the unknown. We want to be prepared for what the future holds. And so we have this multi-billion-dollar industry which has been developed just to forecast the weather, right? So that I know how to plan. So therefore, it's no longer the unknown. I want to make the unknown known before I even get to it, right? Because so now it provides me with a little bit of consistency, so I can actually forecast what even the weather is going to be like. So even the climate, However, it doesn't just stop there with the weather. Think about other climates in our life. Think about the political climate. When you think about the political climate, is it simply a matter of, okay, this policy goes in, this policy, okay, I'm voting for this candidate, but there's zero attachment. No, there's so many emotions involved with this change, right? Just think about the emotions that get wrapped up within the political climate, right? And the political climate is often about change, things changing. Somebody in office, changing offices, somebody else new coming in. There's a lot of emotions involved with that. Other climates that we look at, financial climate. We look at the stock market, we look at inflation, we look at wage increases, the list goes on. Just think about when you went and filled up your car with gas. Those think about that. The last time you put fuel in your car and you saw the numbers go up, keeps going, you keep going, or finally you filled your tank full, and you're like, oh, $60 to fill up my car, right? There's probably an emotional response. It wasn't simply, okay, whatever. No, there's an emotional response. It was like, wow, I think back, I used to do this I remember filling up my car for $30 and now it's 60, right? Now I have this emotional response. And then I think, well, how am I going to keep doing this? It goes back to that survival mode, right? Wow, this has changed. The price in gas has changed. How am I going to keep affording how to do this to fill up my car? So this is that consistency. Now, we've talked about major things, right? Politics, even the weather, financial. But it doesn't have to be major things in your life. It could be little things in your life that affect you. There's this example I want to show you. I want to give you an example. I want to show you this little video clip. And should I share my sound there too? So I want to show you a video clip. And as you watch it, some of you may recognize what movie this is from. But this is an example of how little changes, even little changes, but consistently happening, can have a major impact on someone's emotional state. I'll go ahead and play this.
I don't care if they lay me off either, because I told Bill that if they move my desk one more time, then I'm quitting. I'm going to quit. And I told Dom too, because they've moved my desk 4 times already this year, and I used to be over by the window and I could see the squirrels, and they were married, but then they switched. See.
Hi, Milton. What's happening? Milt, we're going to need to go ahead and move you downstairs into storage B.
No, I was told I could
have
not.
Some new people coming in, and we need all the space we can get.
But there's no space.
So if you could just go ahead and pack up your stuff and move it down there, that would be terrific.
I was told
okay.
I could stay. Excuse me. Yeah, I believe you have my stapler.
All right, what movie is that from? Unmute yourself. Let me know.
Office Space.
Office Space, Amber got it. Now here's the thing in Office Space. This character we saw, Milton, things are constantly being changed for him. Right, little things, like every day. In the very beginning of the film, he's in that clip that says they've moved my desk 4 times. And that's driving up. And as the movie goes along, you see him deteriorating more and more and more and more. Like his physical presence becomes worse and worse and worse. And it just keeps eating at him. And that stapler, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, there's a stapler. It's got this red stapler. Now, a fascinating tip, a little bit of information is, before this movie, they didn't make red staplers. They were not red. Well, in the movie, they painted it red because they wanted it to be this icon thing for him, the security blanket, this thing that never changes. And then finally somebody takes that one last thing from him, and that's the tipping point. So after that, guess what they started doing? They started making red staplers because people started looking for red staplers. But little things, right? Just the stapler, the consistency, it goes back to that consistency, right? If you don't have consistency, suddenly we're thrown into this unknown. So just to first 15 minutes of today was simply saying, okay, why is change difficult? What's happening internally when we face change? Well, you're experiencing emotions. And also, you're also experiencing this lack of consistency. You're going into the unknown, and consistency equals survival, right? So we want to know what's happening. So that's just a quick introduction of those concepts, because what's going to lead us into next is, let's look at the specifics specific things people actually go through, the specific emotions, the specific thoughts, the specific patterns of these emotions and thoughts that the majority of people go through when faced with change. And again, it's going to help you as an individual say, okay, well, how do I handle change? But also, if you have people that you, maybe team members or direct reports, you can say, okay, how do I lead them through it as well? What can I do to help support my team when going through change? Before I do, what questions are there? Big topic. There's got to be lots of questions on change. What questions are there? I'm looking in the chat too. Feel free to plug stuff in the chat as well.
I think the questions are going to come, at least for me, more around, like what you said at the beginning, is change is the only thing that is constant. So it's something that we're always going to be having to deal with. So I think, and I imagine we'll get some of these out of your presentation here, but more things about the fact that change is a constant thing. What are the constant things that we need to be aware of to deal with that? So we're always going to be, I mean, even if we stay in the same job, or even if we live in the same house for our lives, there are going to be these other maybe micro changes, like losing your stapler, or other things like that may not raise to the level of the sky is falling, but even some of those smaller things where it's still a change. I'm sure you've read the book, or you've at least heard of the book Who Moved My Cheese.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that where looking for those little things about not always dealing with the big changes, but also dealing with the small changes. And is the advice that you give to people the same in between large and the small?
Right, good question. So large change. So I'm not a neuroscience, so I don't claim to be a neuroscience, but the research on neuroscience of why, because some people handle change better than others, and that's just something we're going to throw out there right now. I don't really cover it today, but in the longer course, we talk about the different approaches to change. Some people just naturally will adopt to change quicker, just like some people will adopt to new technology quicker, right? The early adopters of technology, and some will not. It's the same sort of thing. But what the neuroscience studies show is that the ability to adapt to change, whether small or big, has to do with the basically right and left hemisphere being able to communicate, and how they communicate and how you process it. So with little change, when some people like little change to throw them off, there's actually something happening, like neurologically, there's something happening. So there are things that you can exercise, basically exercise your brain, exercise that muscle to help with those things. Whereas other people, like the little changes don't matter. So it's not actually the same. I wouldn't say there are the same things that you would actually approach little changes in life as big changes. There are some things we're going to talk about at the very end that I think can apply to both, though. But I think there are specific things that you do want to do for little change and big change. It's a great question. So hopefully the couple things at the end will actually address that too. What I want to show you here is something called the change curve. And the change curve is actually a pretty useful tool to help understand and manage yourself during change. And it really is applied to like some major changes, but I also see people go through the change curve on changes that aren't so major as well. So the change curve was originally developed in the 1960s by an individual called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was her name. And she developed it to explain the process, the grieving process that someone goes through when they're given a terminal diagnosis. Medical diagnosis, a terminal medical. So I'm getting, when a doctor gives a patient a terminal diagnosis, she developed this model to kind of walk people through the process they're going to be going through, the grieving process. Since then, this has been taken and actually widely utilized to help people understand just their ability and what they're going to go through with any sort of change. Because they realized that it actually matched. So organizations now use this as a way to help lead people through organizational change. So that's what we're going to look at real quick. And you're going to recognize this. I mean, this is probably nothing new to you, but maybe just framed a little differently. So if you think about it, when you first go through change, when you first are faced with change, major change, let's think of something major change just to help understand the concept. One of the first things you might go through is shock, anxiety, excitement. I mentioned before the example of, hey, you're gonna be a parent. You're having a baby, right? There could be shock. There could be excitement. There could be a little bit of anxiety. Right? Anybody ever been faced with change where they're actually shocked for a little bit? Yeah, right. When I was told, hey, we're closing the office down, you're going to work remote, I had a little bit of a shock moment going on there. Got to be honest with you, right? A little shock. Like, what? Right? So when this happens, during that time of shock, you're going to see disbelief in people, right? They're not going to believe it. That's shock. That's what shock is, that people just don't believe it. I don't believe this happening. In fact, one of the first words out of people's mouths when you give them a news of some change or something happening is they might say things like, no way, right? That might be that their initial response, they can't help. No, really? Right? Disbelief. They're in shock. That's what this shock is. So I'm sure you've experienced that yourself. So what do you do? So the question is great. We know that if we are faced with change, and people are going to go through shock. That's the first phase they go through. What can we do to assist with this? What can we do to help them at this stage? I'm going to actually open up to you and ask you that question before I answer. What can we do?
Is maybe an important first step validating that reaction so that they don't feel like it's a total inappropriate response to the news?
Absolutely. Think about that, right? Somebody's like, no way. You're like, yeah, come on, just get over it. You're like, wait, hold on, let me process this shock, right? So yeah, it's like, yeah, I know, right? I mean, that's right there just validates it. I can't believe that's happening, right? Right, yeah. And that's all it takes, right? Give them space to process, be patient, listen empathetically. I'm getting that from the chat. Absolutely, those are all things. Give them space to process. That's one of the big things, right? Give them space because they have to process this thing. There's not much you can do to rush people through the shock phase, right? In fact, think about it medically. When someone's going through physical shock, right? What do you do medically for them? Do you say, hey, get up, get off the ground, come on, let's go? No, right? You wrap them up in a blanket. Like literally, someone's going through shock, what do? Get a blanket. Keep them comfortable, right? You're not going to move them. You're not going to make them get up. You're not going to tell them, hey, get over it. No, you've got to give them that space. So when people are going through shock, just know, hey, if you're the one especially announcing this change, just prepare that you got to give people space, right, to go through that. If changes comes at you unexpectedly, expect that response from yourself of disbelief and expect that from other people as well. Now, one thing that's important to understand, and I'll mention this multiple times throughout today, is that not everybody travels along this change curve at the same speed. Right? You may go from shock and anxiety onto the next phase relatively quickly, while your coworkers are still in shock and disbelief. Right? That's very important to know. All right. So you're not saying, hey, what's wrong with you? We've already gone past that phase. Well, they may still be there. Or they may already be off the shock phase and they're already into the next phase, but you're still trying to process this. So that's very important to know. So shock and anxiety, allow it to happen. Give them the space. Validate. Yeah, this is something else, isn't it? I get it. The next phase, we're going to move on to what we know as denial, frustration, and even anger, right? This is basically refusing to accept that change. All right, so I've already come out of shock, and now I'm going to refuse to accept it. I'm not going to be open to new ideas or explanations. This could be because I feel threatened in some way, right? Maybe I've just been told that, some big news about your department and you were, wow, that's shocking. And then you go past the shock and you're going, wow, what does this mean for me? And that's when maybe you feel threatened a little bit. Give you an example. The department that I work in, we're going through major changes. Just got announced like last week that we had these changes. So we're going from a staff of 8 to a staff of 28 by September 5th. All right. Wow, what implications does that have? Right? We don't know. we don't know yet. We're still trying to figure that out. Think about it. So we all went through this shock phase. You know, I mean, somebody made the announcement, okay, so we're, you know, you're not going to have 28 people. They're basically, this department is going to come now work under your department. Oh, right, shock. And of course, people were like, no way, that's not going to happen, right? That's the denial, right? And then people got past that denial, and now guess where people are? I've had conversations with coworkers, and they're in that denial frustration stage of, what does this mean for me? Right? They're not ready to accept this change, because right now it's like, is my job going to be affected? Are they going to be taking my job? Right? And then what happens at this stage is we start thinking the worst, and we start creating stories of what this change is going to actually entail, even though we don't know, right? Because it's still unknown. People will start generating their own stories about what this change is actually going to bring. These people are going to take over my job. I'm not going to have this. They start telling us, but yet we don't know. So what do we do during this time? Well, it's important that when we're at this stage here, this frustration, anger, denial, communication is key. Right? Communication is key. Now, during the shock thing, what you don't want to be doing is trying to communicate to people all the great things about this change, because they're still in shock and they're not going to hear you. But once they're in this phase of really start creating those stories, you want to make sure you're communicating. And what you want to communicate is the actual change, right? You want to reiterate what's actually happened, just the facts, right? And provide them as much facts as possible. And at this stage, you may not know everything. You probably don't. You probably don't know all the implications of the change. And it's so important to actually communicate that you don't know. Or if you're leading somebody through change, it's so important to say, look, we don't know yet. We don't know. I can't promise. I can't, what you don't want to do is you don't want to promise them something that turns out to be false, because that will obviously derail things down the road. But you definitely want to say, look, this is what we know. This is what we don't know. When we find out, we will communicate it as soon as we can, right? So this stage. Again, the other thing people will do, so to kind of give you an idea to recognize this stage, is people will look for people to blame for this change. All right, so you might hear that in conversations with your coworkers, right? Well, this is all of a sudden such's fault. Well, if this person hadn't done this, or this department, is such and such, you'll start finding those scapegoats, and you'll recognize, okay, these people are in that denial, frustration, anger stage, right? When you hear things like that. All right, suspicion, skepticism, frustration. When you see that in others, you know that's the stage that they're in. When you see that in yourself, you know that's the stage that you're in, right? All right, I'm being suspicious about this. Is this gonna work? This isn't gonna work. Merging these two departments is gonna just not work. Well, then I recognize I'm in that second stage here. And what do I need to do? I need to focus on what I really know, right? To help myself from going down the road. We'll talk a little bit about that. Third, you can notice it's right in that. The third stage is going to be right inside that valley, the lowest point of the curve. So you could probably already recognize that in that stage, people are going to be in despair. This might be the depression stage, the complete resistance stage. Because after people get past this frustration and denial, they often fall into the despair/depression stage, right? And this can often be the hardest and feel the longest. All right. This is the stage where people tend to feel sad, regret, guilt, negative emotions come into play, right? Negative emotions. People might just give up. It's a dead end. What's the point? Everything seems hopeless. You might notice this stage when people feel indifferent to things, just indifference to the change. Okay, whatever. You might see that, whatever. This department's going to do whatever they want without my opinion anyways, right? That's that despair stage. So, perfect example. Yesterday, I got a phone call from a coworker that was in this stage, and the phone call was basically, I just feel like nothing matters anymore. And suddenly this one change was considered the tipping point for him from all the other things happening in life. I have all these other things happening in life, and this one thing happens, and what's the point? Right? Okay, so now we know where in this, where in the change curve this individual is sitting, right? They're in that space. So what do you do? And what do you do for others, and what can you do for yourself? And they're not the same thing, by the way. So let's say, what can you do for others? Maybe on your team or people that you oversee. What can you do for them when you recognize that this is where they're at? I'm going to open it up and ask. See what you have to say. Check in. That's in the chat. Check in on them. I like that. Talk a little bit more about that.
Probably support more than anything, so that they don't have to carry all the other practical stuff in life.
Right. Check in, support them, right? In the chat, empathy, relate if you can, be available for questions, discuss what the facts are, right? Exactly. Validate their feelings. All of these are exactly absolutely right. So you already know the answer. You already know what to do. You're good to go. You don't need me. All right. So it's true. These are the things. People are going to be reassured by the knowledge that others are experiencing the same thing. And it's allowing them to know that you're not alone, because when you're in this stage, one of the fears that comes along with depression is isolation, this fear of isolation. And that's where it starts becoming dangerous. When people start feeling isolated in this, feeling like themselves, we don't want to get to that point. So you want to make sure that you let them know that, yes, either A, I'm exactly where you're at. I understand. We're right there with you, right? I'm not here to help. I'm not here to give advice. And just let you know that I'm here too. And if you're not there, let them know. Yep, I understand. I've been through. Yep, I completely understand. And validate, just like they said in the chat. Validate what they're going through. Now, what about for yourself? What advice would you give yourself if you find yourself in this stage that you wake up and you're like, what's even the point? Why even get out of bed? Or why even go to work? Why even go to this meeting? Maybe it's not so drastic. Maybe it's like, you know what? They're going to do whatever change they're going to do without me, whether I like it or not. So why even bother going to this meeting? Because whatever I say doesn't matter. So why even go to this meeting? What advice would you give yourself? Reach out to a friend for support. Good. Communicate to someone you trust. Good. Gratitude. Collect small things to reflect on positively. Good. I'm going to touch on this one. Find the silver linings. Yeah. Don't go to management. I'll get bored. So got to move forward at some point. Got to move forward at some point. This is kind of a key element here. You find yourself in that stage of why, this is whatever, why. Find something small that you can do and do it. Find something small that you can do within that work and do it. You know what? I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to move forward in small little directions. Now, the reason why you can't do that for other people, because imagine you're in this stage of basically, sadness, regret, guilt, negative feelings, everything, and somebody comes to you and says, just buck up. Is that going to help you? No, it doesn't help, right? It's got to come from yourself. So for internally, when you find yourself in these positions, it's just like, what small thing can I do? For example, when people find themselves, in a situation where you've been given some terrible news, medical news, you've been given some horrible, terrible medical news. My tendency is I'm just going to stay in bed for days. Like, what's the point? That's my tendency. To get out of that, and nobody can come and tell you, hey, just buck up. Things are going to be fine. That's not going to help. But for yourself, you just have to say, okay, I just have to get out of bed, and guess what? I just have to comb here. Today, I'm just going to get up and comb here. That's the small step I'm going to take. That's what I'm going to do today, right? So apply that sort of mentality at work. Like if you find yourself, things are changing, whether it's small or big, it's like you just feel like, what's the point? Find something small that you can do to move forward, right? Just to move forward. That's for yourself. Again, for others, you've got to give them the support that they need, right? And let them know that they're not alone. So it's really important to reach out and check in with people. This is very true of the virtual world. People who have virtual teams or even hybrid teams, this is extremely important with going through any sort of change, is that they know that they can reach out, or that you actually just reach out and see how they're doing. Check in on them. I think that was one of the first things that was in the chat. Check in on them. Right? It's so important in the virtual world because we can't just run into people and say, hey, how you doing? What do you think of it? How you feeling? No, you've got to actually be really mindful and actually make an effort to check in on people. Right. Now, eventually it does. And once that does move on, the next stage that we go through is bargaining. Bargaining, in other words, the change is here. I finally kind of accept it. I'll find a way to survive it, if nothing else. So that stage, we start to look at, all right, what does this mean? What opportunities are there? I'm going to become curious to it. I'm going to be open to suggestions. I'm not going to be accepting it 100%, by the way. I'm still going to be cautious, but I'm going to be open to things. Now, the best thing that you can do for yourself and for others in this stage is either give yourself something to do or give them something to do that will contribute positively to the change. Give them a task that will actually affect the change. You see them open for it, great, here's how you can help, and give them something to do that actually has to do with that change. Make them a part of it at this point. All right, make them a part of it. Include them in it on a tactical level, on a very practical task level. Make them part of that change. All right. Now, the last level, the last one on the change curve. Acceptance, support, excitement. All right. Final step, that's what it is. There's a sense of progress. And by the time everyone reaches this stage, the change is probably firmly in place. All right, it's kind of become that new reality. You remember that term that we heard years ago that I got sick of tired? What was it? The new normal, right? Remember that term? People stopped using that, but for a while they was like, oh, the new normal. The normal, like, oh my, that just the new normal. Well, by this time it has become the new normal, right? It's not something that we're looking towards. It has become that way by the time everyone's here. But don't accept everyone to be completely 100% excited about it. They just accepted it. Right now they're supporting it. Some people will be excited. So keep that in mind. Even though when the people have accepted it, doesn't mean they're going to be 100% on board with it. Now, again, it's important to remember that during this change curve, not everyone's going along the same trajectory, right? They don't all move at the same pace. And some people will go back to the one prior. It's very possible for me to go from bargaining and curious back to despair and depression, if I'm not given the support I need with the bargaining and curious stage, right? If people aren't given actually tasks to help become part of the change, they might see this is pointless again, and they go back to that resistance, despair, pointless stage. So it's very important to keep people moving along the curve because they can go back. All right, before I go on, what questions? That's just kind of understanding the different stages that we go through when faced with change. Again, depending on the size of the change, can really depend on the severity of the stages we go through. You could be hit with maybe not so major change, and you go through this change. You'll go through the same change curve, but maybe it won't be as drastic and won't take as long. Right? You may actually be able to go through this within an hour of hearing something. Wow, I can't believe that's happening. Man, really? This is a stupid idea. And they're like, there's no point. Well, maybe there's something there for me. Okay, I can do that, right? I can go through that within a minute, but I'm still going through this process mentally and emotionally. So it really depends on the size. Kind of get back to Stephen, like small changes, big changes. You're still going to go through this process, but depending on the size and the impact of the change you're going to have, it could be either a long drawn out or it could be a really quick process. Just go into the chat here. I want to make sure I catch everything. How is change fatigue related to experiencing multiple stages of change curve? Change fatigue is something. Oh, yeah, let's get to change fatigue, burnout. Okay, another topic that I talk a lot about in a lot of our trainings is the change fatigue. Why are we seeing such a burnout rate in different career fields? All right. Why do we see, I think it's 32 or 37, I can't remember the exact number, 32 or 37% of new hires within the healthcare system will leave within 12 months. That's just UCLA Health. That's not nationwide. That's just us. Okay, we just found that out a few months ago. Why? That's a question. Well, why we really didn't see an uptick, by the way, in attrition over the last few years within our health system. It didn't really change that much. Interestingly, I think we're going to see it more now. Okay, that's just my prediction. I think we're going to see it now because the changes have all come and we've all been working through the change. We're all supporting each other, and now we're at this point of and now we have time to breathe and think. And we might be thinking, maybe I do want to make, maybe I can't do this anymore. So I think we're going to see things now, but that's just my prediction of looking at the organization. But a lot of it is burnout comes from too much change too fast. Why? Well, because you're not, especially if it's over the same topic, and we'll give a very practical example of change always happening. COVID-19 policy procedure rules. They changed every hour. And the changes and directives came from the state level, they came from the federal level, they came from health boards, they came from UC, they came from the hospital, they came from the county, they came from all these places. And so people didn't even have time to go through the change curve to understand the new changes before that change was changed. That's what was happening. So I was in an emergency room this is a different hospital, not UCLA Health, but I was at one emergency room. There's a Providence hospital, and I was talking to their nurses there and their physicians, and they were saying that, we don't even know the protocols anymore. So this is what we're doing. So they just said, you know what? We decided we're not changing. We're just going to do this because too much change. We can't handle it. And then I went to another hospital in the same city that was also under Providence, and they had a different set of rules that they were following because there was so much change coming on an hour by hour basis. What they told me, like it seemed that every hour there's something new that they just burned out. So that's a great thing. Like change fatigue is too much change too fast. You don't have a time to even get through that change curve before you're hit with another change around the same exact topic. Yeah, that's a real thing. What if you're not sure what stage others are in? Are there some questions you can do to find out? Yeah, that's a great question. You can ask them 2 questions, depending on their work style. You can ask them, how do you feel about this change? How do you feel about it? And depending on what they respond, will give you a pretty good indication of where they're at. They could say like, I just can't believe this is happening. Oh, okay. Denial. Like you're in disbelief. I can't believe it's happening. It's pretty clear, right? And how do you feel about this change? I just feel like there's no point. All right. Resistance, despair, depression. I feel pretty optimistic. I think we can do this. All right. Bargaining, curious. Now the other thing you can ask, because some people don't relate to that question of how do you feel. They relate more to the question of what do you think about this change? Because if you ask me what I feel about it, I'm like, man, whatever. I don't feel anything. Feelings don't even come into play for me. Okay, well, then what do you think about it? Oh, well, I think it's a bad idea. I don't know how we're going to do it. Okay, resistance. All right. What do you think about it? Well, I really think that there's no point. Okay, we're in despair, depression because you think there's no point. Those are the 2 questions that I would ask to find out, okay, can I gauge where you're at? And then based on where you're gauged at, then I know what information do I need to give you? What do I need? What kind of support can I provide for you? Okay, based off of one, that's a great question. Very, very, very good question. And the remaining time that we have, I do want to hit a couple of other topics here because I don't want to be with, great, there's a change curve. Good luck. All right, what is that? Okay. You do have some practical things on what you need to be aware of, but I want to help you with getting yourself through this process as well. As the questions you can answer yourself will help your teams as well. So when you're in that maybe denial, frustration stage, right? You start telling yourselves those stories of, man, this is going to be horrible. This isn't going to work. Stop yourself and ask yourself this question. What do I understand about the change? Like, what do I actually understand? Do I understand why it's happening? Write it down. Because often you'll be like, I have no idea why we're even doing this change. This change isn't needed. Well, guess I need to go get some information. I need to go back to somebody that knows, and I need to get real information, not made up information. Do I really know what this means for me and my team? Okay, then I'm going to make a list. You know, what do I know? What are the knowns? What are the knowns? Make a list, right? Because we need to know those knowns. We need that consistency for survival. We need to know what we know. But if you don't actually stop and verbalize it, sometimes you miss it. So stop and verbalize it. Once you do that, ask yourself this question. What do I not yet understand about this change? I don't know why it's happening. These are the things I don't know how it's going to affect my team. I don't know if it's going to affect our day-to-day job. I don't know if it's going to affect who I report to. I don't know, right? And make a list of what you don't understand, right? Because what that's going to happen, what that's going to do is that's going to prevent you from making up those stories, because you're going to be able to say, I don't know what this means in this area. So therefore, I'm not going to start saying, oh, it's going to be horrible. I'm not going to have a job. No, I don't know yet. Right? I just don't know yet. And then if you lead a team, they're going to come to you for advice and questions, and you're going to be able to say and reference your list of, here's what we know. Here's what we don't know, and we're going to find out together. And when I know, I'll let you know. Okay, those are the two questions. Then there's a third question. What are some obstacles, thoughts, feelings that are going to keep my team from embracing this change? Right, specific things. What are some thoughts? It's going to change my day-to-day operations. It's going to mean that I can't do XYZ anymore. Right, you can predict some of these things. So get them out on a piece of paper in front of you ahead of time, right? And even for yourself, get them out in front of you ahead of time. The fourth question you can ask yourself is that, because whenever a change occurs, especially one that's unexpected, right? It's important to start, you may have to reprioritize some goals and tasks and objectives for yourself, and even your daily activities, so they align with the demands of this change. So ask yourself, what makes the most sense to start, continue, or stop in order to adapt to this change? What do I need to do to adapt to this change? How many people's work environment is exactly 100% the same as it was 3 years ago? Whatever, 3.5 years ago, whatever. How many of you are exactly identical? I don't see any hands raising. Sue.
Mine isn't the same as it was 3 hours ago.
There you go. I like that. Yeah, right. Perfect. Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, here's the fascinating thing. Even for those employees who remained on ground and didn't get any sort of remote or hybrid work, they're on ground. Their meetings that they had with people are now online, right? How many people are now meeting online? Even if I'm in the office, when I go to a meeting, could be online now, which that was not the case by any means of the stretch of imagination. 3 years ago, we weren't doing Zoom meetings. We were meeting in person. So even that has changed. So if that's changed, you got to start asking yourself, okay, my work environment has changed. The way we work has changed. The way we interact has changed. Well, what do I need to stop doing? What do I need to start doing? I can tell you one thing that we need to start doing that we don't do. We need to start putting buffer times between Zoom meetings. How many of you put buffer times on your calendar for at least 15 minutes before Zoom meetings? Because I guarantee you right now, we get off here in 10 minutes. How many of you have a 1 o'clock meeting? Absolutely. We need to stop doing this to ourselves. You're talking about fatigue. Oh my gosh. In 12 months, we're going to start seeing studies coming about people's eyesight's failing. We're going to see all this optometry is going to be all this blow up about, oh, you need to do all these eye muscles, you're going to start looking 20. I mean, it's going to happen because we're looking at 20 inches away from ourselves all day long. So what do we need to stop doing? and start to add 15 minutes of buffer space between your meetings. It'll help you. And make a point of actually looking away from your computer screen. Anyways, a very practical example. So the questions you want to ask, those 4 questions, can ask yourself are helpful for you, but they're also going to be helpful for your team if you're leading them through it, because it's going to give you the answers to help support them. All right. So here's what I want to do. I want to leave you with a few, well, 3 kind of practical things that you can do that will help you through any change. All right. These are like self-care. Think about self-care, get your mindset right. And I don't think these are going to be new to you, by the way. I think you're going to see these are like, yeah, I know that. But the question is, yeah, I know these things I know, I teach these, but I don't always find myself doing them. So it's always good to have a reminder, okay, kind of a refresher here. So the first one is when you're going through any change of any kind, one of the first things you can do is prioritize your self-care. All right, because the fact is, if you're sleep deprived, if you're over-caffeinated, you're under-exercised, you're much less likely to be able to focus and manage your emotions. And again, change equals emotions. So you're going to be less likely to manage those emotions to make good decisions and lead people through the change. So it's really important that you not just focus on your team, you need to focus on yourself as well. I mean, that's key. All right. So, I mean, all too often what happens when we get hit with change, that's the natural tendency, is not to take care of ourselves. It just is. This could be seen at the very beginning of the pandemic. Guess what happened with people's self-care? You'd think, oh, it skyrocketed up. Everybody was buying elliptical machines. Everybody was buying this. Yes, well, guess what also increased in sales? Alcohol sales went up 300%. All right, so that's a good sign of our self-care during major changes, right? Big major change, everyone buys alcohol. Not everyone, but alcohol sales goes up 300%. So it kind of gives you an idea of, okay, when we're faced with big changes, sometimes we actually do more damage with our self-care thing. So yes, we have good intentions. Yes, we bought the elliptical. No, I never used it. Yes, so that's actually the true story too. I did buy it. I just sold it. Anyways, these things are just truth. So you really need to prioritize your self-care during changes, all right? Whether it's eating, sleeping, physical activity, which is a very hard one for us in this virtual world of physical activity with Zoom meetings back to back, right? We're not even walking from room to room to meeting to meeting. It used to be I had to walk from Westwood to Ronald Reagan for a meeting and I got some exercise. Now I don't have to do that. So it's really important you focus on that. I don't want to keep harping on that, but it is important. The next thing that you could really do is take actions with small steps. All right. Don't think that you're going to be faced with the change and you're going to take wide sweeping steps, right? Really focus on those little things that you can do. So you find yourself in a position when you don't know, right? Take those small steps. Take small steps because you're not going to have all the information you need right away. Usually when change occurs, you don't know everything. So you're only going to take little steps anyways. And I'm assuming everyone knows why this picture is up there, right? Does everybody know why this picture is relevant to taking small steps? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, good. Roberta, you know what this picture is all about. Mary, you do too. All right.
One small step for man.
One bionic leap for mankind, right? That was the saying.
Small
Right.
steps.
One small step. That's right, Mary. All right. So take small steps. All right. Small steps. The last thing that I want to share with you is this is a very important one that I see many people get bogged down with any change, and it actually has to do with taking small steps. In order to take those small steps, you don't want to fall prey to analysis paralysis. Right? During any change, there's going to be a lot of types of decisions to make. These decisions can affect your success, your team, all these things, right? Oh, if I make this decision, how's it going to affect me? If I make this decision, how's it going to affect me, right? But you don't want to get stuck in this whole thing. Well, I can't make a decision until I have more information. We see this a lot, where a leader's not willing to go forward because they don't have all the information. Well, unfortunately, you're not going to have all the information until it's too late. So you're going to have to take those small steps. Right? So on a very practical level, if you want to know kind of a strategy for saying, okay, well, at what point do I make a decision? Allow yourself a certain time frame to gather all the information you can, And once that time frame is over, commit to move forward, knowing that some of your decisions are going to be wrong. Some you're going to misstep some along the lines. But guess what? These are small steps. So you're able to correct it and make new steps. All right. So just understand that. So instead of seeking the perfect way ahead, you want to focus on doing your best on being open to feedback and learning as you make those small steps to navigate any sorts of change. All right, in the last few minutes remaining, I want to open it up. Questions, comments, concerns?
I have a question. So going back to the change curve, we talked about how someone can go back and forth.
Mhm.
If someone does that change the strategy on what we're doing for them?
Mhm.
Because, for example, if someone needs their feelings validated and then they've come to a point where they've accepted it and then they go back to anger and things like that, I feel like if you keep validating it, does that make a difference, or is there like a different strategy on how to deal with that?
So yeah, it's funny because you think about it, every step of the way, I was like, what can we do? And it was like validate. So validation happens almost every stage, right? It's like, yep, I get it. You're feeling that way. That's normal, right? So the question is if people are angry and they get through, they're at the point where they're curious and moving forward, and suddenly they go back to it, which can happen. People have these step backs of something happens and think, oh my gosh, this isn't happening. This isn't going to work anymore. What you have is you have something else to work with. You have what's already happened, right? So you already have the past to look to. So you can say, yeah, I get you feel this way, but look where we've already come. Look how far, what you didn't have before. Now you've got, look what we've already done. Look what you've already achieved, right? So you're able to point a little bit, kind of like that future, right? It's not unknown anymore. We do know more than we knew before. And so point out the known, right? Because now we know more. So now I actually have something I can tell them. Hey, this is actually working. See, these are the things that are good that are coming out of it. These things. So now you have more information to provide them.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. And this kind of lays into it. You can't stop moving forward if you have one team member that keeps going back there. All right, that's something else that you can't let them stop you from moving forward with the change. If you have one individual that's resistant to the change, that can't happen. All right, and at some point, as the whole change is happening, we've seen that. I mean, when people are unwilling to change ever, they usually leave. I mean, that's usually, it's really like, if you think of a big change, if they're not willing to make the change, they usually aren't around anymore because they're unwilling to make the change. And that's, a very small percentage. Anyways, I know some of you had that 1 o'clock meeting and I want to give you 30 seconds to do whatever you need to do before the next one. But thanks so much. Let me know if you have any other questions too. I'm here.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And a special thanks to Nickle, of course, for this wonderful presentation. I took a lot of notes so that I can deal with my change coming up. And we are, I think, closing in at 1 o'clock. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.